Have you ever been playing a video game and then finished it and then just sat there going, man, what do I do with my life now? It's a weird feeling, right? Assuming the experience you had with the game was a good one, it can be a complicated emotion. You're happy with this game that you just played and the fun that you enjoyed with it, but at the same time you're sad because you can never quite experience it in the same way ever again. Sure, you could just play the game again, but it'll never be quite like that first time, that wonderful golden and unknown moment of happiness. As you sit there stewing in your conflicting feelings of joy and dread, you make a wish. You wish that you could play another game like this one, preferably one that's even set in the world of the game that you just beat. And so you pine after such a game. You want what is called a sequel. A sequel is a work that is meant as a continuation or companion to another original work. They exist in all forms of media: books, movies, video games, shoes. Not really, shoes are apparently a big deal. Did you know there's some shoes that get midnight releases? You think there's a Shoe of the Year edition release sometime later that has all the DLC included at a much better price? I probably don't need to say it, but video games in particular are known for their sequels in daunting numbers. Games upon games are released in a series to the point that you wonder why they're still numbering them anymore. And of course it'd be hard to call some of these games sequels. After all, while the joke about Final Fantasy's name being a misnomer is deader than disco, only a few of the Final Fantasy games are even related to each other aside from the names and some recurring elements. That's also part of the reason I'm not really talking about those games in this video. When I talk about sequels, I am mostly referring to games that are direct continuations of its predecessor, games that follow the same universe, story, and characters. The big question I'm asking today is, do games need sequels? I'll go ahead and save you some time wondering on that question, because ultimately there isn't going to be a yes or no answer to it. You see, when I've done these videos in the past, I usually try to come up with a definitive answer based on my personal opinions regarding various trends in gaming. But the more I sit down and think about this, I just can't give a concrete yes or no with this kind of thing. There's too many individual variables with too many individual games to consider. That's why this episode of Do Games Need It's going to be a little bit different from ones I've done in the past. Today I'm going to be talking about when I think video game sequels should and shouldn't exist. Please keep in mind that everything I talk about in this video is purely opinion, so if I somehow insult your favorite game indirectly, try not to get too offended. Also, I'm going to be talking about all of these games and spoiling the hell out of most of them, so if you have any plans on playing any of these games unspoiled, you might want to leave right now. With that out of the way, let's talk about when games need sequels. Wait, is that it? Is what it? Well, usually in your other videos you had one of the other foxes show up to help you out, serving as example, then die horribly. Yeah, I don't know. I used to do that in the past, but it kind of seemed like it went on too long, and honestly, how stupid would it be if we had someone here named Sequel Fox? F*** you. Sometimes when you finish a game, you don't get that wonderfully bitter feeling I described back at the start. And sometimes you'll still be happy for the experience you had, but there's still that gnawing feeling in the back of your mind, like there was something missing. The thing is that sometimes game developers don't get it all right on their first go-around. There's numerous reasons for that, like maybe they were being rushed and they couldn't playtest it thoroughly enough. Maybe they couldn't just make a mechanic work like they had really envisioned in their mind of how it should be. Or maybe they just don't understand that there's certain things in a video game that are not always fun. Sequels give developers a second chance. They get them back into the ring for another round with this creature they've created and now have the opportunity to get under control. Sometimes they're even given the time and proper resources to get it right this time, now that the game has an established market. A great example is with Dark Souls, a game that did for video game advertising what Jaws did for movie taglines. You see, a common known bit of trivia with Dark Souls is that it was rushed late in production, which is why there's certain late game areas and bosses that are severely lacking. It's okay, don't feel bad about dying again and again to the bed of chaos. Turns out this is the developer's fault, not yours. But for real, get good, scrub. Something that really stands out though is the final boss of Dark Souls, Gwyn the Lord of Cinder. On paper, this should be the most memorable and poignant fight in the game. Here you are standing in the place where a man sacrificed everything in order to give the world a fighting chance, and now you're battling with all that remains of him to either continue what he started or snuff it out and become the Lord of Dark. The fight's accompanied by a very solemn piano theme, showing you that, yes, while this fight is pretty epic, it is meant to be an emotional duel above all else. Well, it's too bad, because this fight's frickin' awful, and you can just cheese the guy to death. Overall, the fight with Gwen turned out to be a severe letdown to a lot of people. Despite being touted as a godlike warrior, Gwen's kind of a cheapskate and has pretty much agreed that the best way to beat him is just getting good at parrying and continuously knock him on his ass, or just find some other way to cheese him. Me personally, I'm fond of the whole put a rock between me and him and then stab him with a spear until he keels over method. The creator of the series, Hidetaka Miyazaki, actually expressed disappointment in the Gwen fight. What was supposed to be this grand monumental duel between two forces of nature ended up just being a cheesy slap fight. You see, in Dark Souls, there's multiple different types of styles to play through the game. You can be a stalwart and unmovable knight, a powerful caster, a nimble rogue, whatever you wanted if you put your mind to it. Hell, you could just be some naked hobo that kills everyone with a broken sword. Miyazaki wanted Gwen to be a representation of all of that. Yes, even the naked hobo. He wanted the final boss of Dark Souls to test everything that the player had. No matter what your playstyle was, no matter what your methods to overcoming adversity so far had been, Gwen was going to be a final exam of everything the player had learned so far. Instead, we got this. Thankfully, Gwen was redeemed years later. When Miyazaki made Dark Souls 3, he was given another opportunity to do his ideal final boss battle with the Lord of Cinder. This was the soul of Cinder, the final obstacle the player must face before deciding the fate of the world. And it is glorious. The soul of Cinder has two phases, the kind of thing you expect from a final boss. But what makes it so awesome is that this boss is everything that Miyazaki wanted Gwen to be back in the first Dark Souls. The first phase has the soul of Cinder swapping through various different fighting styles to fight the player, using weapons and spells that the player themselves have access to. You're not just fighting some random boss at this point, you are essentially fighting yourself. You are fighting the player, the very essence of Dark Souls. Everything that you've learned about this game, whether it be from fighting enemies, fighting invading players, or even just using these abilities yourself to have prepared you for this moment. An epic duel with your shadow on the cusp of the end of the world. Furthermore, when the boss goes into his second form, he actually takes on Gwen's moveset, weapon, and musical theme from the first game. And unlike in the first game, Gwen is a lot harder to cheese this time around, considering he can't parry his attacks anymore. What's so great about all this is that Miyazaki was given another shot to make his ideal final boss fight, and he nailed it. He was finally able to make the fight with Gwen that he had wanted to. Miyazaki could have just moved on with his life and never revisited this setting, but by working on Dark Souls again, he was able to give us the final boss battle that we had wanted and deserved. In this case, having a sequel was great. Now, of course, there's obviously more to a sequel than just giving developers another stab at making the game they want through the gameplay. A sequel can also help round off a story that otherwise was incomplete. I'm not saying this is always a bad thing. Games need to have story pacing just like any other form of media. Sometimes it just works better for the story to break things up into multiple segments. I mean, just imagine, what if the original Star Wars trilogy came out as a 6 to 9 hour movie? You really think people would have gone and sat through all of that when it first came out and nobody knew what it was or how it was going to be? Video games can be the same way. Yeah, people don't like being set up for endless amounts of sequels, true, but there have definitely been cases where I'm glad games were separated into separate parts. Golden Sun, a game that I've reviewed on this channel, was originally going to be one gargantuan game, but it couldn't all fit on a single Game Boy Advance cartridge. As a result, plans changed and the game was split into 2 different titles. And as someone who has gone on record to say that Golden Sun is one of my favorite old games, I am so glad that this decision was made. Sure, I've played games that can run upwards to 80 to 90 hours and loved them, but having that split in the middle of this game works so well for Golden Sun because of this story structure. We were able to take a step back and think about what happened for a while, take it all in. And then when the game came back later and we were playing as a different group of heroes, it felt like something familiar, yet something new. If that kind of split had happened halfway through the original Golden Sun, it would have felt really awkward. It's okay to split up a game's myth arc into segments. The important thing is just that the game's flow in a way that we're still getting a complete experience with each one. One of my favorite games of all time is Mass Effect 2, the middle story of a trilogy. But even though Mass Effect 2 is a sequel and ends in a way that will lead into the story finishing in another title, I had no problem with that because the game alone gave me a complete experience and it was able to touch up on some issues and inconveniences that the first game might have had. Borderlands 2 is a game that is pretty much better than its first game in literally every possible way. but despite having endless amounts of DLC content, I never felt the necessity to buy any of it, because I got a complete experience out of the base game. That being said, you wanna know what a big no-no is? Ending on a huge cliffhanger and a cheesy one-liner when it really didn't need to.
Isolate that signal. Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
So yeah, sequels can be a good thing. By all accounts, a game should be able to stand on its own in the first place, but sequels can help carry an overarching story or give developers another chance at perfecting something, making the game that they always wanted to. For all intents and purposes, sequels should be an overall positive experience, and in most accounts, I would say they are. But, as with most things, sometimes they don't get it right. Me personally, I hope someday they'll make another Bubble Bobble. I love those games. You know, I think they actually made a mobile game of that a few years ago. That's kind of random though, why Bubble Bobble? That whole deal with the dinosaurs throwing up on the enemies and turning them into fruit and then eating them, it's a pretty good allegory for the dog-eat-dog world of business. Right, so, moving on to when I think sequels shouldn't exist. Going back again to that situation I brought up back at the beginning, that happy, weird feeling you get after finishing a game. When you get that feeling, that urge to play another game like the one you just finished, ask yourself this. Do you want to play the same game again, or just another game set in this one's universe? A game like this one. When Master Chief destroyed the Ark and stopped the Flood, did you want to play another game as the walking tank that your mom keeps mistakenly calling Halo? Or you just want to play another Halo with Spartans elites and those small aliens that scream and act like children? When Joel and Ellie finally made it out of the woods both literally and figuratively, do you want to play another heartbreaking adventure following them? Or you just want to play another heartbreaking adventure like theirs? There isn't a right or wrong answer to this, obviously. How we enjoy video games varies from person to person. Some people care about story and characters, and some people care about gameplay and graphics, and some just want a healthy dose of both. It's all subjective. But guess what? This is my video, so we're gonna talk about my opinion. And my opinion is that some stories just need to not be frickin' touched. It's funny, but my main reason for sometimes not wanting a sequel to a game is often a similar reason that most people would, that being that I grew attached to a story and its characters. There are times when I feel like something should just be over and done with. What I'm getting at with this is that an interesting and good story has conflict, and since they have conflict, it means that our heroes are going to have to go through some sort of pain and suffering again after they went through a bunch of other crap to finally get their happy ending. If I like a character and I enjoyed their story, why would I want to play another story involving them where I'm going to have to watch them suffer all over again? Here's an example, Telltale's The Walking Dead. I have mixed feelings on this series as a whole, but I enjoyed the hell out of Season 1's story for certain. The writing was great, the suspense was real, and back before I started to realize that my decisions weren't super important in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty nerve-wracking to be constantly reminded that your companions were going to remember every single thing you said or did.
Then, you want me to?
You don't have to.
I'll do it.
No, you don't have to.
I'll do it.
No.
What is that? What did they, what did I do? What is happening? What did I do? One character that I and every single other player seemed to get attached to though was Clementine, a young girl that Lee, the main character, befriends and becomes the guardian of throughout the season. Clem was important to us. She was a living moral compass for a lot of players. There were a lot of times I was making a decision where I wasn't thinking about what was best for the group or what was best for Lee, but instead trying to be the person/father figure that Clementine deserved. It was really effective. It was a huge factor in my decision making. Anyway, I made Clem kill Lee at the end of Season 1. The first season of The Walking Dead ended with Clem on her own, being approached by someone that may have been friend or foe, and then going out on a huge cliffhanger. Hell yeah, I was clamoring for a sequel. They couldn't do this to me. I needed a resolution. I needed my small, possibly biracial child to be safe. She needed to live, damn it. I just made her shoot my zombie ass so that she could live and grow into a stronger person to survive in this messed up world. You can't do this to me. Give me a Season 2. Thank you. Season 2 of Telltale's Walking Dead had the player take over as Clementine, something that was universally praised even by me, and really I think most of us were just happy that Clementine was going to get some sort of resolution and peace after the hell she had gone through. It was smooth sailing from here on out, no doubt about it.
This is gonna suck.
Again, I get it. This is just how you tell a story like The Walking Dead. It's all about suffering, survival, and coming to understand the harsh realities of this new and cruel world. This was the story we expected, and I don't mind that we got it. My complaints are that after Clem goes through hell this season, she could potentially get a somewhat bittersweet ending. And then we got this. Why? I actually remember being excited at first when watching the initial trailer for Season 3 because it seemed like it'd be focusing on new characters and telling someone else's story. But then, lo and behold, here comes Clem again. It's almost like Telltale was afraid that people wouldn't care about this game unless she was in it. Never seen that done before. Nope, 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 nope. It's not that I dislike Clem as a character, it's the exact opposite reason as to why I don't want her in the story anymore. I do not want to watch this character that I've grown attached to and has had to go through all kinds of pain imaginable, suffer even more. I didn't want another season with Clem because I knew what that kind of world The Walking Dead was. Things were going to go badly for her. Sure, she wasn't the main character this time, but seriously, enough is enough. Leave the girl alone. And this example can extend to so many other franchises too. The Last of Us. I don't want to play another game as Joel or Ellie because it's going to be another game of the two suffering, fighting, and killing their black best friends. I didn't want another Gears of War because after 3 games of trying to defeat the Locusts, Marcus and those left finally had a chance to live in relative peace. For the love of God, there had better never be another Metal Gear Solid with Solid Snake because I just... Ugh. Thankfully, this one will probably never happen. Probably. Don't you dare do it. The fact that I care about these characters, these stories, should be a testament enough to that these developers have done well. They've succeeded at making me care about an imaginary person as if they were a real human being. But it's because I care about these characters and because I understand these stories require conflict to be interesting that I don't want to see them ever again. Let them rest. And stories and characters having run their course isn't always the sole reason for not wanting a sequel to a beloved game either. Sometimes I just don't want a sequel because I don't believe it needs one. A game that I haven't talked about on this channel yet, but probably will someday, is Skies of Arcadia, one of my favorite JRPGs ever. It's a game about sky pirates and fighting for freedom and against tyrants that abuse power. It had a fun and likable cast, a great story, a bombastic soundtrack, and it was just a joy all around. For years, Skies of Arcadia fans have wanted Sega to revisit this title, but I'm not really sure if I want them to. Skies of Arcadia was a complete package. There really wasn't much more to be told or what to do with the game. It had a clear beginning, middle, and end, and it was great the whole way through. When I think about wanting to get a sequel, I think if there's any parts of the original game that left me unfulfilled enough to want one, and I can't really think of any. I'm not saying it's a perfect game. I mean, it did have issues, especially in the original Dreamcast version, but it's a good one that I love. And I wouldn't mind playing another game set in this universe, but I want it to have as little to do with Vice and his friends as possible. Also, since E3 came and went while writing this video, I'll go ahead and address that I am super excited for Metroid Prime 4, even though that story is pretty much over. Call it biased, but I think most of us are just excited for another game like Metroid Prime, because those games are so much fun. That being said, even though Metroid is not really a plot-driven game, I hope that 4 is just taking on the title because it fits the style of Metroid Prime, and it's not really a continuation of the Phazon story. All I'm saying is that if they ever make a final game about Samus that ends with her retiring to a nice little house in the countryside, and then proceed to make another game where she loses her Metroid kids again and is pulled into another conflict, that's the cross line that would upset me. There's a lot of reasons why I think there should or shouldn't be sequels, but ultimately what it comes down to is whether I think the story or the gameplay needs to be revisited or not. Ultimately, I love going on adventures with characters that I care about, but there comes a point where the adventure needs to end. But hey, that's just my opinion. You might agree or disagree with me. I'd love to hear about it. Any sequels you looking forward to? Any sequels you kind of wish aren't going to happen? E3 just happened. You know, they announced some sequels there. Metroid Prime 4? We don't know anything about it. And apparently it's not being developed by Retro, I think. But hey, Metroid Prime 4, that's something. Beyond Good and Evil 2, I don't know why that's come up all of a sudden, but hey, I'm welcoming it. I've always wanted a sequel to that game, but apparently it's a prequel, so we don't even know. They swore a lot in that trailer. I mean, there was like 20 F-bombs or something like that. I remember Beyond Good and Evil being a little bit more PG. Like, comment, and subscribe. Hey, did a good job today, Tall. Here, you earned this. Oh, thanks, boss. Where did Sequel Fox go?